When my mom was getting older, I started to think about how to keep track of all of the interesting things she did in her life and how to document that. And I was at a Michael Franti concert in the last row in the balcony of the theater. And during the warm-up band, I was kind of having a little meditation and kind of grooving in my own head. And the Lebanon Opera House is a place where I have done several shows and is a special place to me. And the ushers were asking me, when are you going to be back here? And I was like, oh, I don't do that anymore. I'm not doing those kind of shows. I speak to students and parents. And then all of a sudden, while I'm listening to that music, this lightning rod of inspiration came into me. I actually could see the whole concept of playing my mother through decades of her life. And I could hear the first line and the last line, which are very similar, and that changed a bit. But the concept of playing her and photos of the past, that all just came to me. But I couldn't write a show when my mom was still living. It didn't feel respectful. It felt I wasn't ready. But I just started taking notes in a book. I put the 1960s, and I decided it was the 6 decades I knew my mother. So I had a book with the decades in it, and I just wrote stories and events that occurred in her life and things that I remembered and things she had told me, and just kept track of them. And then that kind of inspired me. She had dementia by the time I was starting to record these things, but there were lucid moments where she reflected and was more honest about situations than she had been, including the death of 2 children who died before I was born. But our older 5 siblings experienced those deaths and how the family went through that. And so she kind of obsessed about particularly the loss of Angus, who was almost 4 when he died. And that kind of became the thread through the whole show. When my mom passed, I really started, and COVID started soon after, and so I was home, not traveling to speak, and I just started writing. And I started writing I wrote, all the stories that I could remember from that decade. As a kid, I did a lot of imitating of people, and my mom particularly, and she had a lot of specific traits. And not only was I good at imitating her, I also had some of those traits. But the process was really important when I was working with my director and with the playwright before the director, to embody my mom without imitating her, make sure it wasn't an imitation, was to become her. And I feel like that process is actually still going on. I've performed it live now 6 times, and it's getting better every time. I think looking at photos of her, hearing stories from my brothers and sisters about growing up before I was born, and my sister Sarah and she was just 3 years older, so the 2 of us had a lot of similar experiences. So we had many conversations about what she was like. And when my mom died, we all talked a lot about her. So it kind of came into me more clearly. My director was very helpful in helping me slowly, for me it was slow, to transition from imitating at times to actually embodying her. Tracy and I worked together for 8 months before the first show on Zoom, and she would do the lines or sometimes just say the subtext and act it and do the different beats and the tone and the inflection to help me. I really learned watching her and then doing it. And that last night, she got on stage and kind of went through the parts that were hard for me, and then that helped set a tone for me and got in my head so I could slowly infuse that, and it's getting better every time. And that night I was much more my mother in her, her 70s and that in her 80s, and I could get into her character much more easily.